Good morning, History 1700 students. Today is day 5.2, week 5, day 2, and we are about to wrap up here. We have 1 week left, and again, as I said in the Google Meet yesterday, remember week 5 will be the last week you'll have short answers and discussion boards, and next week will be devoted to your final exam and your presentation. So remember about the presentation and final exam. Presentation, you'll need to submit a video of you presenting. Two major things I'm looking for are enthusiasm for your topic, but also can you say a lot of it in your own words? Do you know the topic and you're not just reading from your slides? That's what I'm looking for. I can tell if you're reading from your slides, even if you're doing a screencast, which is okay. Like I said, I'd rather see your face, but if you prefer to do a screencast, you don't like to be on video, I know being on video isn't for everyone. I'm getting used to it myself, but a screencast would be okay if that's the route you want to go and you feel uncomfortable being on a video. Just also make sure you're covering your 3 bases, you're summarizing the event, you are comparing and contrasting the books, but most importantly, you are analyzing the differences as you see them from your research. Analyzing the differences is the meat of the presentation. So make sure you're doing that. Make sure you submit a video, either upload a video file, obviously if it's not too big of a file, but obviously as you see, what I prefer is just uploading it to YouTube so you don't have to deal with the file, and it just goes right when you go to the link. And then the other thing, final exam, there will be 4 questions in the final exam. They will be like short answers, but on these I'm not hung up about the specific resources, where the information is coming from. I just want to know that you understand the information. You are bringing up things that we discussed in class, things that you read, that back up what you're trying to explain on the concept you are writing about. So make sure you submit those, the presentation and the final exam, by Thursday, July 30th, the last day of this class this semester. Then also there will be a link to a survey, which I'll put up probably tomorrow or maybe Tuesday. Link to a survey that I want you to fill out, and I'll give you 10 points of extra credit for doing it. But the survey is mainly having to do with how did teaching online go this semester. This is the first time that I've ever done a class fully online, so I want to get your feedback on how I did, how I can do better. Like I said from the very get-go, student feedback has helped shape a lot of what I do in this course, so I appreciate your feedback, and again I'll give you 10 points of extra credit for doing it. So those are the housekeeping items. Looks like all of you are set on your topic in your books. I think that is in the rearview mirror. But today's topic, civil rights and the Vietnam War. Civil rights is a topic I am very passionate about, and it pains me to say that 2 years ago I remember telling a class, well, thankfully what happened in the civil rights movement is behind us, and thankfully racism and prejudice is getting better, and the events in the last few months show that yeah, they're better than they were during the civil rights movement, but racism is unfortunately here to stay, and it just pains me to see what's going on today. And I think to myself, our country is better than this. So anyway, like I said, civil rights is something I'm very passionate about. Just to give you a rundown, just a couple key events led up to the civil rights movement. And this is in that civil rights movement timeline PDF that is attached to the 5.2 short answer. But Reconstruction, after Reconstruction, black codes instead of slave codes, Jim Crow laws as they're called, basically enforced and legal segregation in the South. And that's how it was really until the 1940s. I think the 1940s are the start of events that would play out to lead to the Civil Rights Movement. Early 1940s, there's a march on Washington to try to get defense employment for blacks specifically, and also an anti-lynching law. And it's sad that there wasn't an anti-lynching law by that time, and that succeeded. Got the blacks defense employment, which was huge, and also set up fair employment practices boards in several states, and that was big. So that was kind of the first one in my mind. Second one is the desegregation of the military in 1948, and it should have come way sooner. And this was an outcome from the Cold War, which was getting started right then. And the Truman administration wanted to show that this democracy, this U.S., was really a free country, and that's why he wanted to desegregate the military. The first and largest U.S. institution to desegregate. So the Korean War is the first time that blacks and whites were fighting on the front lines together. And it shouldn't have taken that long. It shouldn't have taken that long. Then other events in the 50s, obviously everyone's heard of Rosa Parks, refusing to give up her bus to a white man in Montgomery, Alabama. And that starts the Montgomery Bus Boycott, which meant that these blacks were boycotting these public transportation within Montgomery. And took almost a year. Supreme Court case came out saying, oh, you cannot have segregation in city transportation, and so that was a big deal. Next one was Little Rock 9. Back up. Brown versus Board of Education, desegregation of schools. Supreme Court case that said that segregation of schools is illegal. We need to desegregate with all deliberate speed. It was, didn't say it, give a timeline. We have to desegregate by this time, but it was a big deal. It was a big deal. So that happened before Rosa Parks. And then, speaking of desegregation of schools, Little Rock, Arkansas, Central High School, Little Rock, Arkansas, was an experiment to see if this desegregation would work. And what happened is state troopers had to escort these 9 black students into Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, 1957, just so they could get into the school, because there were white students out there protesting, saying we don't want those N-word niggers in our school, and that's what had to happen. Is members of the military had to one military guy had to escort each student into the school. Martin Luther King, with the Montgomery Bus Boycott, starting with that, emerges as one of the big leaders of the movement. Not the only one, there were plenty of others, but Martin Luther King gets a lot of the credit, and people think that Martin Luther King is the Civil Rights Movement. No, there was a lot more to it than that. But he was a dynamic leader. He could, he could, what am I trying to say? Go across the line. He could he could dazzle a white audience. He could dazzle a black audience. He could, mesh the two pretty well, and that's why he was so well known and such a dynamic leader. And college students were on the front lines. They organized a lot of the protests. There was lots of different organizations. Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, was a big one. Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was another. But college students were on the front lines, especially when it comes to the sit-ins and the freedom rides. Sit-ins were protesting protesting segregation at what was called lunch counters. These are places where whites only could order their food and get served, and they just sat there. And these protests, you got to remember, especially the variety that Martin Luther King condoned, were non-violent. They weren't retaliating. They would just sit there. They would take the beating. They would take the taunts without retaliating, which was amazing in and of itself. But Martin Luther King knew that a nonviolent movement would generate sympathy. You read about it in the newspapers. You see video of people just being beaten by cops, sprayed by fire hoses, and that builds sympathy, and it did. And acts of civil disobedience also gained sympathy for the movement. And in fact, Martin Luther King, in an act of civil disobedience, got himself thrown in a Birmingham jail and wrote the letter from Birmingham jail, famous act of civil disobedience, to gain sympathy for the movement, and it did. It did. And these freedom riders, going back to them, they were protesting segregation on interstate bus routes. With the Montgomery Bus Boycott, got the desegregation in intercity buses, but in every facet of life, they had to have the desegregation. Movie theaters, restaurants, facilities, even waiting facilities of these bus routes and train stations and whatever. Every facet of life, there had to be some protest to desegregate it. And so these freedom riders were protesting, again, segregation on interstate bus routes, and there were white protesters. And one of the readings that you'll do on this talks about a white male protester front and center named Jim Zwerg, who when one of them was beaten to a pulp and thought he was going to die. And that's very, very sobering, very sobering. And the sit-in protest reading is from a book called, what is the book called? It's by Ann Moody. Oh, I can't remember the name. Coming of Age in Mississippi, that's what it's called. And it's her experience with a sit-in protest in Jackson, Mississippi. And it's just drugged by her hair, mustard, ketchup smeared in her face, called every name in the book. It's horrible, horrible. And like I said at the very beginning, I thought we were past that, but stuff like that is happening today, and it's sad. And but the major civil rights victories, I would have to say, and they're in that timeline: Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited discrimination in employment, in basically every facet of life. These facilities, transportation facilities, restaurants, you name it, employment, and it even extended to women as well. So it wasn't just a racial prejudice; it was prejudice towards women with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And then also another big victory was the 23rd Amendment, which prohibited racial discrimination in voting practices, and the 23rd Amendment, which outlawed poll taxes to prevent blacks and other races from voting. So the 15th Amendment, after Reconstruction, gave non-whites the right to vote, but it took two other pieces of legislation to actually give that teeth, to make it really happen. So, and that took 100 years. So that's gives you a perspective of how things went. I'll end on this with civil rights. My first few years at Hurricane Middle School, where I teach, I was the English as a second language teacher, ESL teacher, and in that class I had a Chinese girl, I had Samoans, I had obviously Latinos, Hispanics, and these were kids that were fresh from their country. They were only a year or two removed from their home countries, and we read a book that had racial prejudice at its core. And the final discussion we had after reading that book, I asked every single one of them, have you felt racial prejudice here at Hurricane Middle School? and every single one of them did not hesitate to say yes. My ESL aide is from Nicaragua. She bawled at the racial discrimination that she had, racial prejudice that she had felt. You know, she said they called me a dirty Mexican. They felt that all I could do was be a housekeeper, and just seeing that experience, I thought to myself, my heavens, even in our own little town of Hurricane, there is racial prejudice, and unfortunately, it's here to stay. Hopefully, it's getting better. And in my 9th grade class, we do a human rights unit, and that's my final plea at the end of the unit. I hope, if you haven't learned anything else, that you have learned to not be prejudiced against anybody because of their background, the color of their skin, anything. You know, celebrate differences. Differences are awesome. And I hope that you guys will learn that as well, and always remember that. So the readings are the ones I mentioned, and the questions are what's inspiring about those readings, but also if you were a single college student at that same time, early 1960s, would you join the protest? Why or why not? And I love the put yourself in history questions. They are very, very reflective, and you think to yourself, wow, what would I have done if I was in the same situation as those people in history? And I love those questions. Just real quickly, short order, Vietnam War, that's the other topic for today. I lumped them together just because this semester is so short, I have to get anything in. Vietnam War, really started in the 1950s. The French had Vietnam before World War II, wanted it back, wanted U.S. help in taking it back, and there was a communist faction in the northern half of Vietnam. There was anti-communist faction in the south. And in the 1950s, when the French were trying to get U.S. help, Eisenhower said, no way, I'll send you some money, but I'm not going to send troops in there, because Eisenhower wanted to avoid another Korean War. And so it wasn't until the 1960s that we got involved really hotly into Vietnam. And the impetus for us to get involved, as I say, hotly in Vietnam, was the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. And this Gulf of Tonkin Resolution was in the aftermath of some firing on a ship called the USS Maddox in August of 1964. And some people say that it was false sonar readings. Were we really attacked? There were two supposed attacks. One, we kind of say was confirmed, but the other, they don't know for concretely. And it's similar, in my mind, to going to war with Iraq. Absolutely knowing they had weapons of mass destruction when didn't really find them. So, kind of similar premises to go to war. But that Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, anyway, it basically was the closest thing to a declaration of war that there was. It gave the president a blank check to do whatever he felt necessary in Vietnam. And in Vietnam, we were used to being the big boys on the block. We were used to trying to stop the spread of communism. That's what happened in the Korean War, ended in a stalemate. And so we had this domino theory. You've heard that before. That we felt like if one country falls, then other countries will fall afterwards. And so that's why we wanted to make sure we stopped South Vietnam from falling to the communists. And that's why we went to the war. We didn't understand the Vietnamese people very well. And just escalated, and we dropped more tons of bombs on Vietnam than any Allied power did in World War II. It was a case of Lyndon B. Johnson, president at the time. In my mind, this is how I see things. Okay, you can look at the research and see it differently. But he was a control freak. He was a micromanager. He wanted to make all the decisions. He didn't listen very well to his military leaders. And that's what we need to do in such a conflict, is listen to our military leaders who are on the ground, who know what's going on. And there was a lot of times he didn't. There's no clear strategy, no real policy in the war, and it was just haphazard effort. And that's one of the reasons it failed. But Another reason it failed is we totally underestimated the resolve of the Viet Cong, the North Vietnamese. They were fighting for their land, and we were just fighting for a country that wanted to stop communism, and we didn't. And some of the soldiers, didn't even know why they were there. And another thing about Vietnam that you got to remember is, yes, the draft was implemented. Soldiers went, not knowing anything about it, and not knowing why they were there, what we were fighting for, really. And the sad thing was, there was little respect for the military during the Vietnam War. These soldiers drafted to serve a country, do their duty for their country, came home, and were advised not to wear their military uniform, because if they did, they would be spit on, and they were. They were spit on. They were called baby killers. They're called baby killers because, there were 11-year-olds, with guns coming towards them in this war, and